The night my husband brought another woman into our home, he did not look ashamed until my 4-year-old daughter asked if the lady was staying in my bed. That was the moment the room went silent. Not because anyone cared about Nora's heartbreak, but because a child had said the truth out loud before the adults could dress it up as something cleaner. I stood in the entryway of our Norfolk house with rainwater dripping from the sleeves of my navy coat, one hand still wrapped around the strap of my service bag, the other holding Nora's small mittened fingers. The porch light behind us flickered against the glass storm door. Inside, the house smelled like roasted turkey, cinnamon candles, and expensive wine. The kind Caleb only opened when he wanted people to believe we were happier than we were. It was Veterans Day weekend, and I had driven 3 hours from a legal review at the base because Caleb had told me dinner mattered to his mother. For once, he had said over the phone, try to be present. I had swallowed that insult because marriage teaches you to swallow many things before you finally understand which ones are poison. I expected Marlene at the dining table, maybe criticizing my uniform, maybe sighing because I had missed the first toast, maybe reminding me again that Caleb's father had built this family with sacrifice while I was busy signing documents in an office. What I did not expect was Brooke Ellis standing beside my fireplace in a cream dress, holding a glass of red wine, wearing the pearl earrings Caleb had given me after Nora was born. She turned when the door opened, and instead of surprise, she smiled, as if she had been waiting for me to arrive late to my own life. Avery, she said softly, like my name belonged to a woman she pitied. Caleb stood near the mantel, his tie loosened, his face pale but controlled. His mother sat in my chair at the head of the table, her silver hair swept perfectly back, her hands folded beside a plate she had not touched. Nora pressed closer to my leg. "Mommy," she whispered, "why is Miss Brooke here?" I looked at Caleb, waiting for anything that resembled panic, apology, explanation, even guilt. He gave me none of it. He set his glass down carefully, as if the crystal deserved more gentleness than I did. "Nora, go upstairs," he said. My daughter shook her head. No. Her voice was small, but it was firm enough to make Brooke look away. I squeezed Nora's hand. "She stays with me." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because some sentences are so cruel they leave your body before tears can. "Make what harder, Caleb? The dinner? The affair? Or the part where your girlfriend is wearing my earrings?" Brooke's fingers moved instantly to her ears. Marlene stood so fast her chair scraped across the hardwood. "Do not create a scene in front of the child." I stared at her. "You invited the scene into my living room." Caleb stepped forward. "That's enough." His voice had the tone he used when speaking to junior staff, calm on the surface, sharp underneath. I had heard it through walls, across dinner tables, on calls he thought I was not listening to. "Brooke is here because we need to stop pretending." "Pretending what?" I asked. "That this marriage works." The words did not strike all at once. They entered slowly, like cold water seeping through a sleeve. Nora looked from him to me. She did not understand the sentence, but she understood the room. Children always do. They hear the truth under adult voices. "You asked me to come home for dinner," I said. "I asked you to come home because this needed to be said in person." Marlene lifted her chin. "Caleb has been unhappy for years, Avery. You know that. Years." The word opened something inside me. Years of deployments, legal reviews, base emergencies, daycare pickups, frozen dinners, birthday parties planned at midnight, uniforms hung beside tiny dresses, Caleb complaining that my Navy career made him look secondary, Marlene asking when I intended to become a real wife instead of a woman who saluted strangers and came home tired. "Unhappy," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Caleb rubbed his forehead. "You were never here. I was serving. You were hiding behind service." His voice rose for the first time. "Behind paperwork, behind rank, behind that office at Norfolk where you act like reading contracts makes you some kind of hero." Brooke looked down into her wine. Marlene did not. She watched me with the calm satisfaction of someone who had rehearsed this moment in private. "You chose the Navy over your husband," she said, "and over your daughter more often than you want to admit." That one landed. Not because it was true, but because Caleb did not correct her. I looked at him and waited. He looked at the floor. In that silence, 6 years of marriage changed shape. Every time I had defended his mother, every time I had apologized for being called back to base, every time I had packed Nora's lunch before sunrise, driven to work, handled classified reviews, come home to a sink full of dishes, and a husband who asked why I seemed distant. Every time I believed exhaustion was a season, not a warning. Nora tugged my hand. "Mommy, can we go?" "Yes," I whispered. Caleb's head snapped up. "Avery." "No," I said. "You don't get to say my name like you're the reasonable one." I turned toward the stairs, but Marlene moved first. She walked past me into the hallway and opened the coat closet. "I already packed what you'll need for a few nights." The sentence was so absurd I simply stared. She pulled out 2 suitcases, one navy blue, one small and pink with plastic unicorns on the zipper. Nora's suitcase. My daughter saw it and began to cry. "Grandma, why did you pack Bunny?" Marlene did not answer her. She dragged the luggage toward the door. "This is Caleb's house. He needs peace. Nora can stay here if you insist on being dramatic." The room tilted. "You are not separating me from my child." Caleb said nothing. Nothing. That was the part I would remember later more clearly than Brooke's earrings, more clearly than Marlene's suitcase, more clearly than the rain. My husband stood 12 feet away while his mother discussed my daughter as if she were furniture. "Caleb," I said quietly, "tell her." He swallowed. "Maybe Nora should stay tonight, just until you calm down." Nora wrapped both arms around my thigh and sobbed. Something inside me became still. Not calm, not numb. Still. "Get her coat," I said. Caleb blinked. "What?" "Get our daughter's coat." Marlene scoffed. "Avery, don't be ridiculous." I looked at Caleb. "Get her coat." He hesitated, then reached for the little red jacket hanging beside the door. Brooke stepped backward as if fear had finally entered the room and chosen a side. Caleb handed me the coat without meeting my eyes. I knelt and helped Nora into it, my fingers steady even as my heart beat so hard it hurt. "Where are we going?" she cried. "Somewhere warm," I told her. Marlene opened the front door, and the November rain came in sideways, cold enough to steal breath. She pushed the blue suitcase onto the porch. The pink one fell on its side, and Bunny, Nora's gray stuffed rabbit, slipped halfway out of the front pocket. Nora screamed for it. I picked it up, tucked it under her arm, and stood. Caleb finally spoke. "Avery, don't turn this into a war." I looked back at him, at the man who had once cried when Nora was born, at the man who now stood between his mistress and his mother, and called my refusal to be humiliated a war. "You did that when you opened the door for her," I said. Then I stepped outside. The door closed behind us before I reached the bottom step. Not slammed, closed, carefully, quietly, like we had been dismissed from a meeting. I carried Nora to the car because she was crying too hard to walk. Rain soaked through my uniform coat, down my collar, into my shoes. I shoved the suitcases into the trunk without checking what Marlene had packed. Nora sat in the back seat, clutching Bunny under her chin, whispering, "I want to go home." I gripped the steering wheel and stared through the windshield at the house I had decorated, cleaned, paid bills in, nursed fevers in, prayed inside, forgave inside. Warm yellow light glowed from every window. Brooke's silhouette moved near the fireplace. I could see Caleb standing behind her. He did not come outside. That was when I stopped hoping he would. The drive to Annapolis should have taken 4 hours in that rain. I made it in 3.5. Nora slept after the first hour, worn out from crying, one cheek pressed against Bunny's torn ear. I did not call ahead. I did not know what to say. "Dad, my husband replaced me tonight. Dad, your granddaughter was almost kept from me. Dad, I think my marriage ended while everyone else was eating dinner." The words sounded impossible, so I drove in silence, past dark exits and wet highway signs, until the old brick house appeared at the end of my father's street with one porch lamp glowing like it had been left on for years just in case I needed it. I parked crookedly in the driveway. My hands shook so badly I could barely unbuckle Nora. She woke as I lifted her, confused and cold. "Where are we?" "Grandpa's," I whispered. I knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. Samuel Stone stood there in a gray sweater and reading glasses, older than he had seemed the week before, steadier than anyone had a right to be. His eyes moved from my wet uniform to Nora's trembling mouth, then to the suitcases behind me. He did not ask why. He did not ask what happened. He reached out and took my daughter from my arms. "Get her warm first," he said quietly. "The rest can wait." I stepped inside, and the smell of cedar, old books, and coffee broke me harder than any insult had. Dad wrapped Nora in the wool blanket from his armchair and carried her toward the fireplace, murmuring to her like she was still a baby. I stood in the hallway, dripping rain onto the floor, unable to move. 10 minutes later, Nora was wrapped in dry pajamas from a drawer Dad still kept for her, sipping warm milk with Bunny tucked under her elbow. Only then did my father turn to me. His expression had changed, not angry, not yet, precise. The way he used to look from the bench when a witness had said one sentence too many. "Avery," he said, "did Caleb make you sign anything before he threw you out?" For a second, I thought I had misheard him, because there are questions a father should never have to ask his daughter at 2 a.m. while her child is asleep beside a fire, and rainwater is still dripping from her sleeves. "Did Caleb make you sign anything before he threw you out?" he repeated, softer this time, but not gentler. My father had spent 28 years in Navy courtrooms, first as a JAG officer, then as a military judge, and I knew that voice. It was the voice he used when emotion had to wait outside the door because facts were about to matter. I shook my head. "No, not tonight." He studied my face. "Before tonight." I opened my mouth to answer quickly, then stopped, because marriage is full of signatures people forget. Mortgage papers, insurance forms, school emergency contacts, bank authorizations, deployment powers of attorney, documents slid across kitchen counters while dinner burns and a child is crying in the next room. Caleb had always hated paperwork. He called it my language, not his. He signed things with the impatient confidence of a man who believed details were beneath him, until details became weapons. "I don't know," I admitted. Dad nodded once, as if that answer told him more than certainty would have. "Then we start with what you do know." He walked to the hall closet and pulled out one of his old Navy sweatshirts, folded neatly on the shelf where he kept extra blankets for Nora. "Change first." "You're shaking." I looked down and realized my hands were trembling so badly that my wedding ring clicked against the zipper of my coat. "I'm fine." "No," he said. "You're functioning. That is not the same thing." It was the kind of sentence only my father could say without making me feel weak. I took the sweatshirt and went into the downstairs bathroom. Under the yellow light, I finally saw myself properly. Wet hair flattened against my cheeks, mascara blurred under my eyes, service blouse wrinkled from the drive, lieutenant commander bars still pinned to my collar like proof that I could advise captains, review classified contracts, stand in rooms full of admirals and speak without shaking, but I could not stop my own husband from closing a door in my daughter's face. I changed slowly. When I returned, Dad had placed my uniform coat over the back of a chair to dry and set a mug of chamomile tea on the table. Nora was asleep on the couch under 2 blankets, Bunny tucked under her chin, her little red jacket hanging by the fire. Dad sat across from me, not touching his tea. "Start wherever you can," he said. I stared at the steam rising from the mug. It wasn't always like this. He did not interrupt. Caleb used to be proud of me. At least I thought he was. When I made lieutenant commander, he brought flowers to the ceremony. He shook everyone's hand. He told people I was brilliant. My voice thinned. Then somewhere along the way, brilliant became inconvenient. Dad's eyes lowered, but he stayed silent. When Nora was born, I took every week of leave I could. I came back slowly, part-time at first, then full-time because the command needed me, and because I needed to remember I was more than diapers and grocery lists. Caleb said he understood. Marlene didn't. She kept saying a mother's first duty was home, as if I had not built my entire life around duty. I looked toward Nora. Her mouth was open slightly in sleep. The rain tapped gently against the windows. Every time I stayed late at the office, Caleb acted wounded. Every time I came home exhausted, Marlene said I looked cold. If I missed dinner because a contract review ran long, I was selfish. If Caleb missed bedtime because of a corporate event, he was providing. I didn't see it at first. Or maybe I saw it and called it stress because that was easier. Dad folded his hands. "And Brooke?" I flinched at her name. "She works with Caleb, communications director for Whitaker Defense Solutions. I met her at a company holiday party 2 years ago. She was friendly. Too friendly maybe, but I didn't want to be that wife. You know, the one everyone dismisses as jealous because she notices what no one else wants to admit." "When did you know?" Dad asked. "Tonight," I said, then shook my head. "No, that's not true. I knew in pieces. A hotel receipt in Richmond." A message he turned over too quickly. A weekend retreat that didn't show up on the company calendar. The way Marlene started saying, Brooke understood Caleb's world better than I did. My throat tightened. His world. As if I wasn't the one who kept ours from falling apart. Dad got up and added another log to the fire. He did not do it because the room was cold. He did it because he knew I needed a moment to breathe. Did he ever threaten custody before tonight? Not directly. I rubbed both hands over the mug. He said Nora needed stability. He said judges don't like mothers who are always at work. He said deployments make women hard. Then he would smile and tell me he was only worried about me. Tonight his mother said Nora could stay there if I insisted on being dramatic. Dad's jaw moved once, tightly. It was the first sign of anger I had seen. And Caleb? He said maybe she should stay until I calmed down. For the first time, my father looked toward Nora in a way that frightened me. Not because he looked violent, because he looked certain. Avery, he said, listen to me carefully. A man who watches his child cry in fear and calls the mother dramatic is not confused. He is choosing an angle. I closed my eyes. I don't want a war. Good. Wars are expensive and children pay first. He stood and walked to the small study off the kitchen. I heard a drawer open, then another. When he returned, he carried a dark green folder tied with a cotton string. It looked old enough to belong to another version of my life. He set it on the table between us. I stared at it. What is that? Your mother's trust. The air left my chest. My mother had died when I was 23, 1 month before I graduated from law school, before Caleb, before Nora, before the Navy became the place I poured all the grief I did not know where else to put. I thought the trust was just for education and emergency funds. Most of it was. Dad untied the string. But when you and Caleb bought the Norfolk house, you asked whether using part of your inheritance for the down payment would make sense. I remembered the conversation faintly. Caleb had hated needing help. He had said real men bought their own homes. Then he accepted the money anyway because pride bends quickly when interest rates rise. You told me it was handled. It was. Dad slid the first page toward me. Your mother wanted any family home purchased with her money protected for you and for any child you might have. Caleb signed an acknowledgement before closing. I stared at the signature. Caleb Whitaker. Clean, confident, careless. Mine was beneath it. I don't remember this. You were planning a move, preparing for a command inspection, and trying to keep your husband from feeling embarrassed about taking help from your dead mother's estate. His voice softened. You trusted the wrong person to care about the same things you did. I read the highlighted section once. Then again, my mother's contribution to the home was not a gift to Caleb. It remained protected trust property until repaid, refinanced, or transferred under conditions that preserved Nora's residence and my legal interest. If the marriage ended because of adultery, financial misconduct, abandonment, or conduct endangering a minor child, the trust claim would be satisfied before any equity distribution. I looked up slowly. Dad? Yes. He signed this? In front of a notary and his own closing attorney. Did he read it? Dad gave me the saddest smile I had ever seen. He asked if it was standard. I told him it protected the people your mother intended to protect. I pressed one hand over my mouth. For months, Caleb had spoken about the house as if it belonged to him because his name came first on the mortgage, because his salary was larger, because his mother had chosen the curtains, because I was often too tired to argue over ownership of rooms I was busy cleaning. He thinks he can keep it, I whispered. I imagine he does. My phone buzzed on the table. We both looked down. An email notification lit the screen. Caleb's attorney. Subject. Proposed temporary custody and property agreement. My stomach turned cold. I opened it with my thumb. The words blurred at first, then sharpened into cruelty disguised as procedure. Caleb was requesting exclusive use of the marital home, temporary primary custody due to my demanding military schedule, and my written agreement to vacate all property claims in exchange for a small support payment until divorce proceedings concluded. At the bottom, one sentence stood out like a slap. Lieutenant Commander Stone's service obligations raise concerns regarding emotional availability and residential stability for the minor child. Dad read it over my shoulder without touching the phone. He did not curse. He did not raise his voice. He simply leaned back, looked toward Nora sleeping by the fire, and said, "Good." I stared at him. "Good?" He nodded. Now we know exactly what kind of mistake he plans to make first. The next morning, I learned that humiliation does not end when the door closes behind you. Sometimes it follows you into daylight, dresses itself as concern, and waits for you at work before your first cup of coffee. I arrived at Naval Station Norfolk just after sunrise wearing the same uniform I had dried over my father's kitchen chair, my hair pinned tighter than usual, my face calm enough to fool strangers and almost no one who knew me well. Nora was still in Annapolis with Dad, eating scrambled eggs in one of his old Navy t-shirts, completely unaware that her father's attorney had described her mother as emotionally unavailable before she had even finished sleeping off the night he let her cry in the rain. I had not answered Caleb. I had not answered Marlene. I had not answered the email. Dad had driven me to the station in silence, and before I stepped out of the car, he said only one thing: do your job today. Not because they deserve your discipline, but because you do. I carried that sentence through the gate, past the security checkpoint, past two sailors laughing near the vending machines, past the corridor where command photos lined the wall like quiet reminders that people were always watching more than they admitted. By the time I reached the JAG office, 3 conversations stopped at once. Not loudly, not rudely, just enough. Lieutenant Harris looked up from his desk and gave me the careful smile people use when they know a rumor, but not the truth. "Morning, ma'am." "Morning." I hung my coat, unlocked my office, and found a paper cup of coffee already sitting on my desk. No note. I knew it was from Commander Reeves because he was the only person in the building who remembered I drank it black when things were bad. 10 minutes later, he appeared in my doorway. "Close the door?" I nodded. He stepped inside, hands behind his back, eyes steady. Reeves was not warm by nature, but he was fair, and in the Navy, fair sometimes felt kinder than affection. "I heard there may be a domestic situation." I almost smiled at the phrase. Domestic situation sounded so tidy, like a drawer that needed organizing. Not a husband moving his mistress into your living room while his mother packed your child's unicorn suitcase. "There is. Are you safe?" The question nearly undid me because it was the first one at work that mattered. "Yes, my daughter is with my father." "Good." He paused. "I'm not asking for details. I am asking whether anything in your personal life touches an active file." I looked at the stack on my desk. I knew exactly which file he meant before he named it. Whitaker Defense Solutions. Caleb's company, Brooks' company, the same contractor currently under review for a maintenance and safety compliance package connected to emergency release mechanisms on Navy vessels. It was supposed to be routine, a pricing issue, a delivery schedule issue, a few missing certifications that procurement wanted cleaned up before final approval. I had been reading the file for 6 weeks because routine was where negligence loved to hide. "Yes," I said. Reeves exhaled through his nose. "How close?" "My husband is a senior operations manager there." "You should have disclosed that earlier." "I did twice." The file came to us labeled as an affiliate review under Harborline Systems. Whitaker's direct role only appeared in the revised subcontracting attachment last week. Reeves leaned against the doorframe. "And you kept reviewing?" I flagged the connection and prepared to transfer it after finishing the preliminary risk memo. "Did you finish it?" I thought of Caleb's voice, calling me a desk officer, saying reading contracts did not make me a hero. "Not yet." Reeves watched me for several seconds. "Then finish the factual index only. No recommendation. After that, you are recused." I nodded because he was right. Procedure mattered most when emotion wanted exceptions. He turned to leave, then stopped. "Stone." "Sir?" "No one here needs your marriage to be stable in order for your work to be credible. Remember that." He left before I could respond. I sat down slowly, opened the Whitaker file, and began to read as if my heart had not been split open 12 hours earlier. That was the strange mercy of law. It did not care how you felt, but it rewarded precision when feeling failed. Page by page, the file rebuilt me into someone useful. Inspection certifications, delivery logs, safety compliance sheets, internal communications, change orders, manufacturing variances described as minor deviations. A phrase like that always made me cautious. Minor to whom? Minor before or after failure? I pulled the technical appendix closer. The component in question was small, almost boring. A locking pin assembly tied to emergency hatch release during flooding or fire. Nobody made speeches about locking pins. Nobody took photographs holding them at retirement ceremonies. But if one failed at sea, a sailor trapped behind a warped hatch would not care how small it looked on paper. By noon, I had 3 pages of notes and a headache behind my left eye. By 2, I had found the first inconsistency. A batch number listed as passed on one form appeared as conditionally rejected on a vendor sheet. By 3, the same batch number appeared again, renamed under a different inspection sequence. That could have been clerical. Most mistakes were, until they weren't. I requested the original email chain from procurement. Harris brought it in with the nervous expression of someone handing a grenade to a person trained to read the label before pulling the pin. "You okay, ma'am?" "No," I said honestly. "But I'm working." He nodded and left. The email chain was long, messy, full of forwarded attachments, buried comments. Corporate language softened until responsibility became fog. Brooke's name appeared first in a public relations draft. Recommend avoiding terms like defect, failure, or recall unless technically required. I read it twice, my body going cold. Then Caleb's name appeared 3 messages below hers, not as a bystander, not as someone copied accidentally. He had written, "If Navy legal focuses on the certification date, redirect to supplier delay. Do not volunteer internal rejection history unless asked." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. It was one thing to discover your husband had betrayed your marriage. It was another to discover he might have helped bury a safety problem that could put sailors at risk. For a moment, I could hear Marlene saying I hid behind paperwork. I could hear Caleb saying I was not a hero. I looked at the hatch release diagram on my desk and thought of young sailors, 19, 20, 21, laughing on mess decks, riding home, trusting that the parts installed around them had been checked by people who did not treat truth as an inconvenience. My phone buzzed. A text from Caleb. "We should talk before lawyers turn this ugly." I turned the phone face down. Then another message arrived. "You're making this harder on Nora." I did not touch it. By 4:30, I had enough to know the file could not remain routine. I walked into Commander Reeves's office with the printed chain in one hand and my preliminary index in the other. "Sir," I said, "I need to be recused immediately, but before I am, this has to be preserved." He put on his glasses and read the first page. His face changed at the 3rd paragraph. "Is this your husband?" "Yes." "And Brooke Ellis?" "Yes." "You understand what this means?" "I do." He looked up. "You cannot make the recommendation." "I know. That's why I wrote it as a factual preservation memo." He leaned back. "How long?" 27 pages with attachments. For the first time all day, something like respect moved through his expression. "Go home, Stone. I need to finish the certification log." "No. You need to send this to me, legal ethics, and procurement oversight. Then go home to your child." I returned to my office, scanned every attachment, numbered every exhibit, and wrote the final line with hands steadier than they had been all day. "For the safety of the sailors who will never see this file, I recommend immediate preservation and independent review." I signed my name beneath it. Lieutenant Commander Avery Stone, JAG, U.S. Navy. Then I hit send, sat in the quiet after the message left my outbox, and understood that Caleb had made one more mistake. He thought my silence meant I had nothing to say. He had forgotten that some of the loudest truths are written in documents people never bother to read. By the end of that week, I understood why my father had always said silence was not the absence of power. It was the discipline to keep power from being wasted on the wrong audience. Caleb expected me to explode. I knew that because every message he sent sounded written for a woman he believed he could still provoke. First came the apology that was not an apology. I never wanted things to happen this way. Then came the warning disguised as concern. "Nora needs stability, Avery. Don't make choices you'll regret." Then came the insult dressed in legal language. "My attorney says your emotional state could become relevant if this gets difficult." I read each text once, took a screenshot, forwarded it to my attorney, and put the phone face down. Dad watched me do this from across the kitchen table while Nora colored a crooked American flag on printer paper, completely unaware that her father was trying to turn my restraint into instability. "You want to answer?" Dad said. "Yes." "What would you say?" I looked at the phone. I would say that he watched his daughter cry while another woman stood in my living room wearing my earrings. I would say his mother packed Nora's rabbit into a suitcase like she was clearing a guest room. I would say that if he wanted stability, he should have protected the child who called his house home. Instead, I took a breath and said, "Nothing useful." Dad smiled faintly. "Good. Never donate language to someone building a case against you." That became the rule of my new life. I did not defend myself online. I did not correct Marlene when she told Caleb's cousins that I had stormed out after a marital disagreement. I did not answer when Brooke posted a photo from a charity luncheon wearing the same pearl earrings and captioned it, "Grateful to stand beside people who choose peace over drama." I let them speak because people like that always mistake an empty room for permission to keep talking. Meanwhile, I moved carefully. My attorney filed a response to Caleb's temporary custody request with the trust documents attached under seal. My father helped prepare a timeline, not with emotion, but with dates, messages, photos, financial transfers, and the kind of quiet accuracy that frightened people who preferred stories over records. At work, I was officially recused from the Whitaker defense file, but the memo I had written had already started moving through channels I could no longer see. Commander Reeves did not discuss it with me. He did not need to. The fact that he avoided the subject told me enough. 2 investigators from Procurement Oversight came to the JAG office on Wednesday and left with sealed folders. On Thursday, Harris stopped by my office with a stack of unrelated briefs and whispered, "Ma'am, there are people in conference room 2 who outrank my ability to breathe normally." I told him to go back to work, but after he left, I sat very still. Caleb had spent years mocking the work I did because he did not understand that paper could travel farther than anger. Paper could enter rooms where he could not control the conversation. Paper could survive when charm wore out. Friday morning, my attorney called while I was packing Nora's lunch at Dad's kitchen counter. "We received Caleb's proposed temporary order," she said. "Is it bad?" I asked. "It is confident." I had learned by then that lawyers used words like confident when they meant foolish but wanted to remain professional. She continued, "He wants exclusive use of the Norfolk residence, temporary primary physical custody, and a written acknowledgement that you voluntarily left the home." I closed my eyes. "He threw us out." "I know." Nora was crying. "I know." His mother packed her suitcase. "Avery," she said gently, "I know, and we are going to make sure the court knows it in the right format." The right format. That phrase steadied me more than comfort would have. After we hung up, Dad walked in carrying a grocery bag. "What did they ask for?" "Everything." "Of course they did. You don't seem surprised." He placed apples in the fruit bowl one at a time. People who have been overprotected often confuse desire with entitlement. I thought of Marlene standing in my hallway, saying, "This is Caleb's house," as if a home became his because she had said so firmly enough. Later that afternoon, Caleb's attorney met with mine and Dad in a small conference room in Annapolis. I did not attend. Dad said my presence would be useful later, not while Caleb's side still believed they were negotiating with a frightened woman who might fold to avoid embarrassment. I hated waiting. I cleaned Nora's markers off the coffee table. I folded laundry that did not need folding. I refreshed my email until the screen blurred. Nora asked if we were going back to the other house, and I told her not today, maybe not soon, but she would always have a bed wherever I was. She thought about that, then asked if Grandpa's pancakes counted as dinner. I said yes because some days survival required flexible standards. Dad came home just before 6. He removed his coat, hung it in the closet, washed his hands, and poured a glass of water before speaking, which nearly drove me insane. "Well?" I asked. He sat across from me. They had not read the trust. I blinked. How is that possible? Because Caleb told them what he believed, and they built a proposal around his confidence. What happened when they read it? Dad's mouth tightened, not quite a smile. The room became educational. He explained it simply. Caleb's attorney had begun by emphasizing cooperation, stability, and the importance of minimizing conflict for Nora. Dad agreed with all of it. Then my attorney handed over the trust acknowledgement, the closing records, and the section protecting my mother's contribution and Nora's residence. Caleb's attorney read the first page quickly, the second more slowly, and by the fourth, he stopped using the word simple. "Did Caleb say anything?" I asked. Dad nodded. "He said your mother's money went into the house years ago and shouldn't matter now." I almost laughed. Of course he did. Then his attorney asked him whether he remembered signing the acknowledgement. And Caleb said he signs a lot of documents. Dad let that sit between us. I looked toward the living room where Nora was making Bunny wear a paper crown. That's his defense? For now. What about custody? Dad's face grew colder. They are leaning heavily on your Navy schedule. I knew they would. They also suggested your work on defense contracts may involve stress unsuitable for primary caregiving. I stared at him. He said that? His lawyer said it. Caleb allowed it. That hurt more than it should have. I had spent years making my career small enough for Caleb's ego to survive it, and now he was trying to make it large enough to take my daughter from me. Dad reached across the table and tapped once near my hand. Do not confuse pain with surprise. You knew who he was when he let the door close. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A new voicemail from Caleb. Against my better judgment, I played it on speaker. His voice filled the kitchen, lower than usual, strained around the edges. Avery, I don't know what your father thinks he's doing, but dragging your mother's estate into this is disgusting. We could still resolve this privately if you stop letting him poison you. Brooke has nothing to do with Nora. My mother has nothing to do with this. You left. Remember that. The voicemail ended. For several seconds, the only sound was Nora laughing in the other room. Dad looked at the phone, then at me. Forward it to your attorney. I did. My hands did not shake. That night, after Nora fell asleep, I sat by the window watching rain slide down the glass and realized something had changed. I was still hurt. I was still angry, but I was no longer waiting for Caleb to become fair. Fairness was not coming from him. It would have to come from records, witnesses, procedure, and the quiet work of people who read before they spoke. Just after midnight, Dad's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted in a way I had seen only a few times in my life. Rear Admiral Lawson, he said as he answered. He listened without interrupting. 1 minute passed, then another. Finally he said, Yes, Admiral, she's here. My body went still. Dad looked at me while the voice on the other end continued. When he hung up, he set the phone down carefully. The Navy read your memo, he said, and they want you in Washington. Washington did not feel like a place people went to be healed. It felt like a place where truth was weighed, stamped, classified, and passed through doors most people never saw. 2 mornings after Rear Admiral Lawson's call, I stood in front of my father's hallway mirror in Annapolis, buttoning my dress blues with fingers that were steady only because I had forced them to be. Nora sat on the floor behind me, brushing Bunny's worn gray fur with one of my old combs, humming softly to herself as if the world had become simple again because breakfast had been warm and Grandpa had promised pancakes when we came home. Dad stood in the doorway holding my cover under one arm. You don't have to look like you're going to your own sentencing, he said. I met his eyes in the mirror. I don't know what I'm going to. That's not true. He walked in and set the cover on the dresser. You're going to answer for work you already did correctly. That doesn't mean people will like the answer. People rarely call admirals at midnight because the answer is pleasant. I almost smiled. He adjusted one ribbon that was sitting a fraction crooked, then stepped back. There was something in his face I could not name, pride mixed with worry, the expression of a father who had taught his daughter to stand straight and now hated that she had to. Remember, he said, you are not there as Caleb's wife. You are not there as Marlene's disappointment. You are not even there as Nora's mother, though that is the best part of you. You are there as Lieutenant Commander Stone. I swallowed. And if Caleb is there? Dad's expression did not change. Then he can learn where your name belongs. I left Nora with him because the meeting was not for children, though by then I understood children were often the reason adults finally told the truth. The drive into Washington was gray and cold, the Potomac lying flat beneath a colorless sky. My attorney had advised me not to discuss the family case with anyone connected to the Navy Review. Commander Reeves had advised me to answer only what I was asked. My father had advised me to eat breakfast, which was the only advice I ignored and immediately regretted. By the time I reached the Pentagon security entrance, my stomach felt hollow enough to echo. A young petty officer checked my credentials, glanced at my name, and looked up a little too quickly. Ma'am, they're expecting you. That sentence followed me through the corridor like a drumbeat. They're expecting you. Not Caleb, not Brooke, not Whitaker Defense Solutions. You. I was escorted to a conference room first, not an auditorium, and found Commander Reeves already seated beside 2 officers I recognized by reputation, not friendship. Rear Admiral Lawson stood when I entered. He was taller than I expected, with white hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of stillness that made everyone else in the room seem louder by comparison. Lieutenant Commander Stone, he said. Thank you for coming on short notice. Yes, sir. Sit down. I did. A folder lay in front of him, thick with tabs. My memo was on top. I recognized the final page because my signature sat under the line I had written when I still thought I was simply preserving a file. For the safety of the sailors who will never see this file, I recommend immediate preservation and independent review. Admiral Lawson tapped that page once. Do you stand by this? Yes, sir. Knowing your personal connection to Whitaker Defense? Yes, sir. That is why I requested recusal and limited the memo to factual preservation. You understand the implication of what you found? I understand there may have been deliberate suppression of an internal rejection history connected to equipment represented as compliant. That is a lawyer's sentence. I held his gaze. Then plainly, sir, someone knew the parts had failed an inspection and tried to make the Navy look somewhere else. The room went silent. Not hostile, focused. Admiral Lawson leaned back slightly. Better. For the next hour, they asked me about dates, attachments, language in the email chain, batch numbers, procurement routing, subcontractor disclosures, and where my personal knowledge ended. I answered carefully. When I did not know, I said I did not know. When they asked whether Caleb had ever discussed the contract at home, I said he had complained about Navy legal slowing business down, but he had not shared technical details with me. When they asked about Brooke Ellis, I identified her role from the documents and nothing more. I did not call her his mistress. I did not mention my earrings. I did not let my private humiliation contaminate the public record. And somewhere in the middle of that room, I felt something inside me straighten. Caleb had dragged my motherhood into a legal argument. Marlene had dragged my duty into a family insult. But here, under fluorescent lights, in a room where nobody cared about dinner tables or charity captions, my work stood by itself. When the questioning ended, Admiral Lawson closed the folder. There is a public ethics and acquisition forum this afternoon, he said. Whitaker defense representatives will be present. My pulse changed. I was not aware of that, sir. You were not meant to be. This began as an industry-facing event. It has become something else. Commander Reeves glanced at me, and for the first time I realized he had known more than he was allowed to say. Admiral Lawson continued. We are not announcing investigative conclusions today, but we are addressing the importance of legal review in preventing operational risk. Your memo will be referenced. Referenced? I asked. And you will be recognized. I stared at him, certain I had misunderstood. Sir, with respect, I was recused. After you preserved the evidence. I only did what procedure required. That is often what people say after doing the thing everyone else avoided. I had no answer. He stood, and the meeting ended as cleanly as it had begun. 2 hours later, I walked into the auditorium and saw Caleb before he saw me. He was seated 3 rows from the front beside Brooke, who wore a navy dress and the composed smile of a woman who believed presentation could survive substance. Marlene sat on his other side in pearls, posture perfect, face lifted toward the stage as if this event belonged to her family. Caleb turned when movement crossed the aisle. Our eyes met. Shock flashed first, then irritation, then something like calculation. During the break before the program began, he stepped into the side corridor where I had stopped near a wall of framed photographs. Avery, he said quietly. What are you doing here? My job. His mouth tightened. Don't do that. Do what? Act like this isn't personal. I looked at him then, really looked. He seemed tired, but not humbled. Afraid, but still convinced fear could be turned outward if he pushed hard enough. The personal part was you letting our daughter cry in the rain, I said. This is something else. He glanced toward the auditorium. You have no idea what you're stepping into. If you embarrass me today, I promise you, custody gets uglier. For one breath, the old instinct rose in me, the instinct to calm him, to soften the room, to pay for peace with my own silence. Then I thought of Nora asking if Brooke was staying in my bed. I thought of Caleb's name in that email. I thought of sailors behind a sealed hatch trusting people like me to read what others skipped. I'm not here for you, I said. His face hardened. Before he could answer, a bell sounded from inside the auditorium. People began returning to their seats. Caleb leaned closer. You should be careful, Avery. I stepped past him. That's why they called me. When the program resumed, Admiral Lawson walked to the podium. The room settled. Caleb sat down slowly beside Brooke, still watching me instead of the stage. The Admiral opened a folder, adjusted the microphone, and looked out over the rows of officers, contractors, attorneys, and executives. Before we discuss failure, he said, we will recognize the officer whose legal memo prevented that failure from becoming a funeral. The screen behind him changed. My name appeared in white letters against a blue field. Lieutenant Commander Avery Stone, JAG Corps, United States Navy. Somewhere in the third row, Caleb stopped moving. For a moment after my name appeared on the screen, I forgot how to stand. Not because I was afraid of the room, but because every insult Caleb had ever placed on my work seemed to rise from the floor and collapse at once. Lieutenant Commander Avery Stone, JAG Corps, United States Navy. It was not my married name that filled the blue field behind Admiral Lawson. It was not Mrs. Whitaker, not Caleb's wife, not the difficult mother, not the woman Marlene said had chosen paperwork over family. It was my name, the one my mother had given me, the one my father had taught me to sign carefully because signatures mattered. The auditorium remained quiet for one suspended breath, the kind of silence that arrives before people understand whether they are witnessing ceremony or consequence. Then Admiral Lawson looked directly toward the rows of contractors and officers. In acquisition work, he said, failure rarely announces itself with alarms. Sometimes failure appears as a missing attachment, a changed batch number, a softened phrase in an email, or a certification date that does not match the underlying record. Sometimes the only thing standing between a sailor and a preventable tragedy is one officer who refuses to skim what others prefer not to read. I stood from my seat because an aide gestured for me to come forward, but my legs felt distant, as if they belonged to the woman I had been before that Veterans Day night, the woman who still believed Caleb's contempt was something she could outlove. As I walked down the aisle, I saw him in the third row. His face had gone still. Not pale exactly, but emptied of the confidence he had worn like a second suit. Brooke sat beside him with both hands clasped in her lap, her public smile gone. Marlene looked at the screen, then at me, then at Caleb, as if trying to decide whom to blame for the humiliation of discovering that the woman she had dismissed at dinner tables was being honored in a room she had entered, expecting prestige for her son. I reached the stage and saluted. Admiral Lawson returned it. "Lieutenant Commander Stone," he said, and his voice carried without effort, "your factual preservation memo initiated an independent review that prevented non-compliant emergency release components from moving further toward installation. That review is ongoing, and this forum will not discuss investigative conclusions. But this much can be said publicly. Your discipline protected sailors who will likely never know your name." He turned slightly toward the room. "That is service." I did not cry. I had cried in my car, in my father's kitchen, over Nora's sleeping face, into the sleeve of a sweatshirt that smelled like cedar and old laundry. But on that stage, I did not cry. I accepted the certificate he handed me, shook his hand, and looked out at the room because my father had once told me that if truth brings you to the front, do not stare at the floor as if you are apologizing for being seen. People began to stand, first the officers near the front, then the attorneys, then several civilians, then almost everyone. The applause was not thunderous at first. It built slowly, respectfully, with the weight of people realizing the size of what had nearly been missed. Caleb did not stand right away. I saw that. So did Brooke. So did Marlene. Finally, as the row around him rose, he stood too, but he did not clap. His hands hung at his sides like they had forgotten how to perform pride. I thought I would feel satisfaction. I thought some sharp, bright pleasure would cut through the pain and make everything worth it. Instead, I felt something quieter and stronger. I felt finished with him. After the ceremony, people shook my hand, thanked me, asked careful questions. I answered carefully. Commander Reeves approached last. "Good work, Stone." That was all he said, and somehow it meant more than a speech. In the corridor outside, Caleb waited near a marble wall with Brooke a few steps behind him. Marlene was nowhere in sight. "Avery," he said. I stopped because running from him would have given him more importance than he had left. "I didn't know," he said. "About the memo? About any of it." He looked toward the auditorium doors. "They're going to destroy me." I studied his face, searching for remorse and finding mostly fear. "No, Caleb. They're going to read what you wrote." He flinched. I was under pressure. So was I. That's different. It always was when it was me. Brooke looked away. For a moment, I saw the fantasy cracking around her. The successful man, the impressive family, the beautiful house, the clean divorce, the woman he had described as unstable now standing in dress blues while admirals spoke her name with respect. Caleb lowered his voice. "Don't do this in court. Don't turn Nora against me." That was when I knew he still did not understand. "Nora is 4, I said. "She knows who opened the door and who closed it." I walked away before he could answer. The months that followed were not simple, but they were clear. The Navy investigation widened. Whitaker Defense lost its pending award while procurement reviewed prior submissions. Caleb was placed on leave, then separated quietly from the company after additional emails surfaced. Brooke resigned before the review reached her department publicly. Marlene came once to my father's house with a silver gift bag for Nora, and an apology so polished it sounded like it had been approved by a committee. Dad opened the door, listened, and said, "A child is not a bridge you may cross only when the weather improves." Then he closed it gently. In family court, Caleb's attorney stopped using my Navy service as a weakness after the Pentagon recognition became part of the record. The trust held. My mother's contribution remained protected. The Norfolk house was ordered sold because Caleb could not refinance what he had never fully controlled. I received primary residential custody, and Caleb received structured visitation that would increase only if he demonstrated consistency, restraint, and judgment. The judge did not punish him for adultery. She did not need to. She focused on the night Nora was removed from her home, the messages that followed, the attempt to use my service against me, and the simple question every parent eventually answers through action. When your child is afraid, do you protect them or protect yourself? A year later, Veterans Day came again with clear skies over Annapolis. Nora was taller, louder, and certain that Bunny needed a medal because he had been brave in the rain. Dad helped her pin a little ribbon to the rabbit's ear while I stood on the porch holding 2 mugs of coffee. The flag by the door moved softly in the wind. There was no grand music, no courtroom, no auditorium, no applause. Just my daughter laughing in a yard where nobody could lock her out, and my father pretending not to smile while she ordered him to salute a stuffed animal. I thought about the woman I had been that night in Norfolk, soaked, humiliated, terrified that losing a marriage meant losing a home. I wished I could tell her what I knew now. A home is not the place where your name is on a mortgage if your heart has to ask permission to rest. A home is the place where someone wraps your child in a blanket before asking questions. It is the place where your work is not mocked, your silence is not mistaken for weakness, and your dignity does not depend on whether someone else finally admits they were wrong. Caleb once told me I was just a desk officer hiding behind paperwork. He was wrong about the hiding, he was wrong about the paperwork, and he was wrong about me. Some victories do not arrive with revenge. They arrive when the truth is read aloud, when the people who dismissed you are forced to listen, and when you finally understand that being underestimated was never proof that you were small. It was proof that they were not paying attention. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever seen someone mistake quiet strength for weakness, only to realize too late who they were dealing with? If you believe in resilience, justice, family, and the power of standing tall when others try to erase you, please like, subscribe, and stay with us for the next story.